From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Satisfied. I know it's a hard storm to recover from, but the amount of progress that's been made, and I really would appreciate any support that we get. I know it is really a good news story in terms of our ability to reach people and the limited number of deaths that have taken place in such a devastating hurricane.
Good news or fake news? Acting Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke and the Trump administration defend their response to the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico. 9 days after Hurricane Maria destroyed much of the island's infrastructure, many of the 3.5 million residents remain without electricity and are desperate for fresh water, food, and other supplies. We'll go to San Juan for an update from the Center for Investigative Journalism. They say the death toll is higher than the government reports. Then we'll spend the rest of the hour with Michael Moore, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker behind Fahrenheit 9/11 and Bowling for Columbine. He's now on Broadway in his theatrical debut. His play is called The Terms of My Surrender.
Oh, basically, none of us are going to surrender. I mean, the actual terms are pretty extensive. It's not just getting rid of Trump. I mean, we have to take a look at how we got Trump. He didn't just fall out of the sky. He's the end result of decades of both dumbing down the country, but also the widening gap between those with wealth and those who work to provide the wealth for those who are rich.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Puerto Rico, a vast stockpile of food, water, and medicines piling up at the main port in San Juan as a shortage of truck drivers and fuel prevents the aid from being delivered to the island's 3.5 million residents, many of whom remain without electricity, communications, and clean water more than a week after Hurricane Maria devastated the island. At least 10,000 shipping containers containing the aid are stockpiled at the port, overwhelming the 4,400 U.S. military members who are scrambling to distribute to rural areas where much of the infrastructure is in shambles. On Thursday, the Trump administration said it would waive the Jones Act for 10 days after Puerto Rico's governor and others demanded the U.S. waive shipping restrictions under the law. In San Juan, thousands of Puerto Ricans boarded a Royal Caribbean cruise ship Thursday, joining evacuees from the U.S. Virgin Islands bound for mainland U.S. This is Laura Brown, who sent her children off on the ship.
I'm here because I'm sending my children to Miami so they can be more comfortable, because they don't have electricity here. Sometimes they have water, sometimes they don't. My husband and I have to work and we don't have anywhere to send them. Sometimes I can't communicate with them all day because there's no signal. I'm afraid to leave them at home alone.
On Capitol Hill, Democratic lawmakers accuse President Trump of neglecting millions of U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. New York Congressmember Nydia Velázquez, who was born in Puerto Rico, said the White House showed far more urgency responding to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, which devastated parts of Texas and Florida, two states that voted for Trump.
Unfortunately, this administration's response has been inexcusably slow and ineffective. To the people who are collapsed in the airport, trying to get off the island, to those of you in houses without roofs, waiting for the power to come back, worry you are not, you are running out of drinking water. To those on the mainland who are worried about their loved ones on the island, let me say this: we're going to keep fighting for you. Do not give up. We will not give up.
The fallout from this year's record hurricane season comes as a new study finds extreme weather fueled by climate change has cost the U.S. economy at least $240 billion a year over the last decade, and that's before an estimated $300 billion in losses from Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria are factored in. The report from the Universal Ecological Fund predicts the cost of climate change to the U.S. is expected to rise to at least $360 billion annually over the next decade. In Syria, anti-government forces say at least 152 civilians were killed and dozens more injured in opposition held parts of Idlib province over the last week. saying Syrian and Russian warplanes bombed 6 hospitals, 5 civil defense centers, power stations, and camps for displaced civilians. Meanwhile, fighting continues to rage in the city of Raqqa, where a Kurdish commander said Thursday ISIS is cornered and breathing its last gasps. The journalistic monitoring group Air Wars reports U.S.-led coalition attacks have killed at least 61 civilians in Raqqa since Saturday, including a young child described as the son of Osama Khadur and Saeed Mohammed al-Sayed, a father of 6. In Somalia, 7 people were killed and 6 others injured when a car bomb exploded Thursday near a bus stop in the capital, Mogadishu. It's not clear who carried out the attack, but local officials blame the militant group al-Shabaab. In Bangladesh, the bodies of 13 Rohingya refugees, including 8 children, washed ashore Thursday after their boat capsized. The dead were among 130 Rohingya aboard the vessel who were fleeing a government-backed ethnic cleansing campaign in neighboring Burma. At the United Nations, the Security Council heard Thursday from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, who warned systematic violence risks spilling further into Burma's Rakhine state, where an additional 250,000 Rohingya might be displaced.
We have received bone-chilling accounts from those who fled, mainly women, children, and the elderly. These testimonies point to excessive violence and serious violations of human rights, including indiscriminate firing of weapons, the presence of landmines, and sexual violence. This is unacceptable and must end immediately.
Back in the United States, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price apologized Thursday for chartering military aircraft to take him and his wife on overseas trips, flights that Politico reports cost taxpayers over $500,000. CNN estimates up to $1 million. The flights took him to cities in Liberia, Germany, Switzerland, China, Vietnam, Japan. Secretary Price reportedly spent another $400,000 in taxpayer dollars for private charter planes on domestic routes that typically had commercial flights available. The White House approved Price's requests, which are highly unusual for a cabinet secretary. But when news of the flights became public, President Trump said he wasn't happy about the expenses and wouldn't rule out firing his HHS secretary. Price said Thursday he'd repay about $52,000, a small fraction of the trip's cost to taxpayers. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, hundreds of protesters gathered Thursday outside a Harvard University forum where Education Secretary Betsy DeVos was delivering a speech on school choice, while scores of students protested silently inside the event, raising their fists and unfurling banners reading "White Supremacist" and "Our students are not for sale." The protesters say they oppose DeVos's efforts to privatize public schools and roll back civil rights and sexual violence protections for millions of students. This is Harvard graduate student Jeff Rousset confronting DeVos in a Q&A after her speech.
My name is Jeff Rousset. I'm a Master in Public Administration student here at the Kennedy School. So you're a billionaire with lots and lots of investments, and the so-called school choice movement is a way to open the floodgates for corporate interests to make money off of the backs of students. How much do you expect your net worth to increase as a result of your policy choices? And what are your friends on Wall Street and in the business world, like the Koch brothers, saying about the potential to get rich off the backs of students?
DeVos fired back. I have written lots of checks to give parents and students lots of options to go to schools of their choice. The balance on my income has gone very much the other way, she said. Joining the protests were sexual assault survivors opposed to a recent move by DeVos to roll back Obama-era rules on how universities investigate campus sex crimes. On Capitol Hill, Republican Representative Steve Scalise returned to Congress Thursday for the first time since he was nearly killed by a gunman last June, walking gingerly on crutches as he returned to the floor of the House of Representatives to thunderous applause. Scalise is House Majority Whip, a climate change denier and staunch opponent of gun control laws. His return to Capitol Hill fueled speculation he could eventually replace Paul Ryan as the next Speaker of the House. The Trump administration said Thursday immigration agents arrested nearly 500 undocumented immigrants around the U.S. over the past week. The arrest came as part of Operation Safe City, an immigration and customs enforcement sweep targeting sanctuary cities including Denver, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York, where local police refused to serve as de facto immigration agents. In North Dakota, the chair of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, Dave Archambault, conceded defeat Thursday in the tribe's first election since the massive protests erupted over the construction of the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. Tribal Councilman Mike Faith won with about 63% of the vote. He said he will focus attention on Standing Rock's economy in a region that's one of the poorest in the United States. And in Brussels, Belgium, over 1,000 people marched near European Union buildings Thursday, calling for safe legal access to abortion across Europe. Many of the protesters focus on Ireland and Northern Ireland, where abortions are legal only when they preserve the life of the mother. This is Emma Cassidy, one of the protesters.
When I talk to my work colleagues in Brussels, they're still consistently shocked at the situation for women in Ireland. The Eighth Amendment of our Constitution practically makes abortion in all situations, apart from the risk to a woman's life, illegal. So it's very important for me to be here, particularly at a time when we know we have a referendum coming up soon.
The event marked International Safe Abortion Day and came as the World Health Organization warned that worldwide 25 million unsafe abortions occur each year. To see Democracy Now!'s interview with Irish abortion rights campaigner Emma Campbell in Belfast, Northern Ireland, when we were in Belfast last month, you can go to DemocracyNow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show with the unfolding humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico. 9 days after Hurricane Maria destroyed much of the island's infrastructure, many of its 3.5 million residents remain without electricity or desperate for fresh water, power, food, and other supplies. At least 10,000 shipping containers that hold aid are stockpiled at the port, overwhelming the 4,400 U.S. military members who are scrambling to distribute to rural areas where much of the infrastructure is in shambles. On Capitol Hill Thursday, Democratic lawmakers accused President Trump of neglecting millions of U.S. citizens in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. New York Congressmember Nydia Velázquez, who was born in Puerto Rico, said the White House showed far more urgency responding to Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, which devastated parts of Texas and Florida, 2 states that voted for Trump.
Unfortunately, this administration's response has been inexcusably slow and ineffective. To the people who are collapsed in the airport, trying to get off the island, to those of you in houses without roofs, waiting for the power to come back, worry you are not, you are running out of drinking water. To those on the mainland who are worried about their loved one on the island, let me say this. We're going to keep fighting for you. Do not give up. We will not give up.
This comes as the Trump administration responded to pressure Thursday to waive a shipping law known as the Jones Act that officials said was hindering disaster relief efforts for Puerto Rico. Also Thursday, Acting Homeland Security Secretary Elaine Duke responded to questions from reporters about aid about the administration's response.
Are you satisfied so far with the federal response? Are you comfortable with what this government is doing?
I am very satisfied. I know it's a hard storm to recover from, but the amount of progress that's been made, and I really would appreciate any support that we get. I know it is really a good news story in terms of our ability to reach people and the limited number of deaths that have taken place in such a devastating hurricane.
Meanwhile, presidential spokeswoman Sarah Huckabee Sanders said Thursday that 10,000 government workers are helping Puerto Rico, including more than 7,000 troops. 3-star General Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan, commander of the U.S. Army North, arrived on the island Thursday to direct the relief effort. For more, we go directly to San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico. We're on the phone with the Government and Media Command Center. Laura Moscoso is joining us. She's a data journalist with the Center for Investigative Journalism, an award-winning independent media that is marking its 10th anniversary this year. They're reporting this week that the death toll is higher than the government reports. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Laura. Talk about what you're encountering now, and what about these figures that you believe the death toll is much higher than is being reported?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having us in your program. So everything that you said on the introduction of our situation in Puerto Rico is still true. We still have people that don't have clean water, that don't have food. We still have people in hospitals that are not being attended to, and we still have all the supplies and resources locked on the ports and the airports. So 9 days after the storm, we are exactly at the same stage. About the piece that we published yesterday, and about the figures and the numbers that the government is saying are the deaths caused by Maria, I can tell you that today there may be more, but the official number is 16 deaths directly caused by Maria. But since yesterday, since we published our article, our phones have been ringing with many testimonies of many people around the island in very faraway places telling us that in hospitals, even in their own houses, and in the emergency centers established around the island for people to get supplies, many people are still dying, and they're not being accounted for. And the government hasn't been able to go down there and see that for themselves.
And can you talk about the stockpiling of aid at the port? What's going on, Laura?
Yeah, I mean, me myself, I haven't been to the port, so I don't have the actual image of these supplies locked on the port. But we do know that many people from outside Puerto Rico, they've been sending many resources and many supplies, and they haven't reached the people that they're supposed to. So there's obviously a lack of distribution. I know that there is a real and practical problem. We lost many of our roads. We lost many of our highways, and it is very difficult to carry the supplies from the ports and the airports into the rural areas of the country. Nevertheless, even in San Juan, we don't see the movement, right? Even in the capital, where the ports are and where the airport is at, we don't see the movement or the deployment of these federal agents that are supposed to be helping into the distribution.
Laura, can you talk about the state of emergency and the executive order now in place in Puerto Rico that includes, what is the curfew, from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m.? And the peace officers, who are they?
Yeah, exactly. So 24 hours after the hurricane, we had a executive order with a curfew that went from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Now it's from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. And this executive order is supposed to be implemented and enforced by local police, local and municipal police. Since yesterday, that effort is now being, it has introduced the peace officers. We don't really know the details about these peace officers. The only thing that we do know is that they are federal agents. They're federal agents from the main island, from the U.S., and I do know that they need to have authorization to do arrests, so they have to be law enforcement. But we don't know anything else besides that, because in the executive order that the government distributed yesterday at the briefing, at the press briefing, that was the only line that talk about that new that new executive order.
You have written about the isolation of mountain areas in Puerto Rico that haven't even been gotten to. The president just appointed a 3-star general to coordinate efforts right now, and President Trump is going there on Tuesday. As we wrap up, what is your response, and how are you personally doing? I know your own organization, the Center for Investigative Reporting, for Investigative Journalism, you were having trouble just reaching your other colleagues for over a week.
Yes, we are now all together, and now we were working as normally as we can. Each member had something and is struggling with something, but we are fine comparing to the situation of other people and other municipalities in the island. What I can tell you is this, right? For me, I'm very worried about the president's visit to the island, because for me that can be a distraction from the important things that need to be happening here in Puerto Rico. As you said, we still have people that we don't know where they are. We still have people that don't have clean water. We still have very old people that lack tank oxygen, that lack the help in the hospitals, literally to survive and that they don't die. And now we're gonna have all these efforts for helping the people move into the security and the news coverage of President Trump. That I'm sure he's not going to come here with water, and he's not going to go into the rural areas to distribute water. He's just going to be here for a few hours. But those few hours are very critical for us and for the government. And so that's very controversial for me.
And finally, the lifting of the Jones Act, Laura Moscoso, the significance of ships being able to come in.
Well, I mean, since the beginning, and because we are very close by to Cuba, to República Dominicana, and to other islands in the Caribbean, and to other countries in South America, and we do have contact with them in educational efforts in other situations, right? Not when we are in crisis. It is very normal that we reach each other and that we try to help, and because of the Jones Act and because of other restrictions, this has not happened. And now we have a 10-day waiver. I don't think the 10-day waiver is enough, because it's been 10 days since the hurricane, and we still are at the same stage as if the hurricane was yesterday. So I am grateful that this is happening, and I'm grateful that other people and other countries can come and help, including foreign journalists that can come here and narrate the situation from their perspective. But I think that a lot more has to be done.
Finally, this news coming in the past few days, the Navy said it would deploy the USNS Comfort for Puerto Rico, a massive ship with 1,000 hospital beds, operating rooms, desalinization plant. Announcement coming more than a week after Hurricane Maria struck, and only after more than 270,000 people petitioned for its deployment. We have 10 seconds, Laura.
Well, I mean, they're saying a lot of things. And honestly, we are not seeing them in the island. And as I told you, for them it's going to be very difficult to get around the island because they don't know it. So the help, even if it's coming when it needs to come, I don't know how good it's going to be.
Well, Laura Moscoso, I want to thank you for being with us. Please be safe. We want to be in touch with you next week. Data journalist at the Puerto Rico-based Center for Investigative Journalism. She's actually at the command center in San Juan right now. This is Democracy Now! For the rest of the hour, we will be speaking with the Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore. Stay tuned.
First they stole our language, then they stole our names, then they stole the things that brought us fame, and they stole our names. neighbors, and they stole our streets, and they left us to die on Rican Beach. Well, you can take my life, but don't take my home. Baby, it's a solid price, comes with my bones.
Rican Beach by Linda Segarra of Hooray for the Riffraff here on Democracy Now! Her family from, yes, the island of Puerto Rico. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We spend the rest of the hour with the Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore, the person behind Michael Moore in Trumpland, Fahrenheit 9/11, Bowling for Columbine, Sicko, Capitalism, A Love Story, and Where to Invade Next. Now Moore has added theater production to his list of accomplishments. He's now starring in his theatrical debut on Broadway, his play, The Terms of My Surrender. He launched the production with the question, can a Broadway show take down a sitting president? In typical Michael Moore fashion, the one-man show infuses humor as he examines the 2016 election, speaks with special invited guests, lays out a roadmap of what he believes needs to happen next. This is a clip from a recent performance of The Terms of My Surrender. In this one, he speaks to actress and activist Rosie Perez.
We have to resist, and we have to just march and shut him down. And I think that the way to do it is the same way that America shut down Trump Care, is not just go to the White House, but go to your local and state elected officials, because they really have a lot of power, and a lot of people don't understand that. You know, if you put pressure on them, they will cave. You know, Trump may not cave, but they will cave.
Right.
And
they want to keep their jobs.
They want to keep their jobs, and they want to keep their paychecks and their free health care. So, it's true, though.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rosie Perez.
Thank you.
Yes, that is Rosie Perez, Puerto Rican actor and activist, speaking with our guest Michael Moore, who is now starring in his Broadway debut, The Terms of My Surrender. He came into our studio right before his matinee performance on Wednesday, and I just asked him, well, the question he opens with, what kind of Broadway show can take down a sitting president?
Yes, I think actually anybody watching this can do this. I really believe in the power of a few people can make huge change happen. And I talk about this in my show, that history is full of examples of people who really changed the world, not accepting the lie that they were told all their lives, that they were just a nobody from nowhere. And so I believe in that, and I believe so. Yes, so I'm on. You know, I've come from Michigan to New York to do this show. I come from the Brexit states out there, and I wanted to do this in the city that gave us Donald J. Trump. I mean, basically, I've come to the belly of the beast here. And we do the show 12 blocks from Trump Tower every day.
Didn't you take a bus there?
We took a bus. Yes, one night we thought we'd go over and have some cheesecake or a tortilla bowl or whatever it is that the KFC, whatever he loves. We were gonna like have some dinner with him, but he said he wasn't hungry. So, what are the terms of your surrender? Well, now, if I told you that, what's the point of coming to it? Takes me 2 hours to explain that. I can't. But basically, none of us are going to surrender. I mean, the actual terms are pretty extensive. It's not just getting rid of Trump. I mean, we have to take a look at how we got Trump. He didn't just fall out of the sky. He's the end result of decades of both dumbing down the country, but also the widening gap between those with wealth and those who work to provide the wealth for those who are rich. We just were interviewing Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Bangladesh, talking about he thinks it's now 5 men own more wealth than half the world's population, right? Isn't that amazing? 3.6 billion people. Yeah, so he's the kind of natural result of this. It's not some crazy accident, the way I look at it. And in fact, he's the result of a racist clause in the United States Constitution. So that electoral college concept of trying to convince the slave states, as you know, you've talked about it on this show, to come into the country, the new country, and we put this clause in there that let them count slaves, while giving them no power really, and so he benefited from that. But the show isn't. I mean, it's not a history lesson. It's not a college lecture. Well, I mean, you've seen it, so the
show is spectacular, and you are constantly responding to whatever the latest is, which is happening every day. So on Sunday, you raise the fist in honor of Colin Kaepernick. Yes, right.
Well, I've been wearing Colin's jersey and the 49ers hat there for well over a year, since he first did that a year ago, last summer, and I participate in the NFL boycott. I don't watch any NFL games. I encourage people to boycott the sponsors of the NFL. The owners colluded to keep him from his job this year because he took a stand. So a few Sundays ago, I got the whole audience. We all stood with these signs, hashtag I'm with Cap, and I put that out on the internet. But this Sunday, I wore his jersey, the whole show, and the whole audience, most of them, raised the fist there with me on the stage. But what was interesting about this past Sunday, I just want to say this, is that it became more against Trump than about the original idea of what Colin was saying, which is that we have to take a stand against this brutality of police killing unarmed black citizens, and that's how this originally started. And the owners punished him for that, and it was supposed to send a message to the rest of the players: don't you take a stand, don't you speak out politically. After Trump said what he said, then it was clear all the players were all going to participate.
I want to go to that moment. Friday night, Huntsville, Alabama. This is what Donald Trump said at his rally.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired! You know, some owner's going to do that. He's going to say, that guy that disrespects our flag, he's fired. And that owner, they don't know it. They don't know it. They're friends of mine, many of them. They don't know. They'll be the most popular person for a week. They'll be the most popular person in this country, because that's a total disrespect of our heritage. That's a total disrespect of everything that we stand for, okay?
As he talked about firing these sons of bitches, Colin Kaepernick's mother said, guess that makes me...
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say
one proud one.
That Trump. See, this is what bothered me though about Sunday, is that we think that he's easily distracted by the shiny keys, whatever it is. There's this awful thing going on with the tragedy in Puerto Rico, and he's completely consumed with the NFL, and so we think that's how simple he is and where his mind goes. But I think, and I'm worried, that we're the ones distracted by the shiny keys, because as soon as he made such a big deal about it, then the protest shifted from what it's really supposed to be about: stop shooting black people in this country, police of America, and now it was all about Trump. And now the owners joined in. They all joined. And once a lot, I think a lot of the players, especially the white players, well, now I'm not going to lose my job if the owners are going to lock arms with us. But then the whole point, and I thought, Jesus, God, Trump is really good with this sort of the way we just jump to the next thing. Something really important is going on every single day in his administration, where they are poisoning this country, where they're selling off lands to oil companies, where whatever it is, it's going on as we speak right now. And we all of a sudden, and especially the mainstream media, gets focused on what he said about, Joe and Mika in the morning. It's just like the whole rest of the news cycle is all about Mika. And it's not about what it should really be about.
But when he does the attack and goes after someone, of course, with these players, we're talking about largely African-American teams, and he's attacking African-American players. You respond, as so many people do, and how critical it is. He may create the situation.
Yes.
But then it has to be responded to. And
then we have to point out, and I think, a lot of the players have pointed out, remember, this isn't really about Trump. We're doing this against the racial injustice, the racism that still exists in our society, and how safe it is to be a black man in our society when it comes to the police pulling you over or whatever. And I think nobody wants that to get lost in all this discussion.
So I want to go then to Puerto Rico, the critical point, right? He tweets however many times, 15 times over the weekend, about the NFL and fire them and cursing. Not once did he tweet about Puerto Rico. And I want to talk about the catastrophe, climate catastrophe there. It took him 5 full days to respond to the plight of Puerto Rico over the weekend, right? 17 times about athletes and, again, protesting police violence. Facing withering criticism on Tuesday, he holds a news conference congratulating himself for his response to the disaster. I think he repeated nearly a dozen times that he was doing a great, amazing, tremendous, incredible job, and denied he'd neglected Puerto Rico. This is what he said.
I wasn't preoccupied with the NFL. I was ashamed of what was taking place, because to me that was a very important moment. I don't think you can disrespect our country, our flag, our national anthem. To me, the NFL situation is a very important situation. I've heard that before about, was I preoccupied? Not at all. Not at all. I have plenty of time on my hands. All I do is work. And to be honest with you, that's an important function of working. It's called respect for our country. The governor of Puerto Rico is so thankful for the great job that we're doing. We did a great job in Texas, a great job in Florida, a great job in Louisiana. We hit little pieces of Georgia and Alabama. And frankly, we're doing, and it's the most difficult job because it's on the island. It's on an island in the middle of the ocean. It's out in the ocean. You can't just drive your trucks there from other states. And the governor said we are doing a great job. In fact, he thanked me specifically for FEMA and all of the first responders in Puerto Rico. And we're also mentioning with that the U.S. Virgin Islands. It was devastated. So we are totally focused on that.
So that's President Trump. Instead of heck of a job, Brownie, it's heck of a job myself.
Yes. And Amy, it's an island. You know it's an island, don't you? And he went on to say, too, there's a big ocean. There's a big ocean there between us. It's like, I'm convinced he has no idea where Puerto Rico is. All he knows is that the people there are not white, and that's why it's not a priority. And let's just be honest and say, how his mind thinks. And the way that he and others too focus on, when they talk about these NFL players, as you say, are 70% African American, and how much they make, and how they keep saying this. Look how much they're not grateful to this country. Look how much they make. Look how much they make. You will never hear anybody complain about what Tom Hanks makes. You will never. It's always a little tell that it's just, wait a minute. We let you in the club, boy, behave yourself. That's really the message. And that message, right there about Puerto Rico. And by the way, did I mention the Virgin Islands? It's like, it's still like, see, we laugh, but now, see, we used to laugh at him, especially New Yorkers. You know this, because you guys are supposed to take care of him for about 40 years and make sure he wasn't foisted on the rest of us. I'm not putting you personally responsible for this, Amy, but I'm just saying, if Donald Trump came from Flint, Michigan, I couldn't show my face on this show, because how could I explain that I, for 30 or 40 years, didn't do something about him there before he would be, thrust upon this country. But he's not a joke. And the time to sort of laughing about this has to be hopefully long gone by now, because we are in very serious trouble here. And anybody who doesn't think he could be a two-term Trump is living in their little fantasy bubble. The Republicans are not going to impeach him. They've already pulled their gerrymandered districts back home. They're pretty sure they're safe. They don't think we can flip those 24 seats in the House next year and 3 in the Senate. And all he has to do is keep his base, which he seems to have pretty well intact, and win those same electoral states. So we have a real fight on our hands here.
Well, you were the one who did predict all along. You took him very seriously, comedian that you are. From the beginning, you said this man has a real chance, even as the Hillary Clinton folks were saying, we want to run against him.
I know, and I, you know, those of us like in Michigan and Wisconsin, we kept trying to get a hold of people at the headquarters in Brooklyn, you know, another New York City. I mean, seriously, you couldn't get through the bubble in Brooklyn to say, would you please come out to Wisconsin and Michigan? I voted for Bernie. I was for Bernie, but she lost Wisconsin and Michigan to Bernie. If you lost your own primary, in other words, your people didn't want you to be president, wouldn't you kind of maybe show up there sometime before the last week of the general election? It was mind-boggling how the poor judgment that took place around her.
We're talking to Michael Moore, and I want to turn right now to, you know, the white supremacist rallies that have taken place after what happened in Charlottesville and President Trump.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Kill the person. Heather hired Charlottesville.
They showed up in Charlottesville to protest. Excuse me, they didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name. I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
That's President Trump talking about the very fine people in Charlottesville, the white supremacists. We're talking about the Ku Klux Klansmen. In Boston, 40,000 people turned out to protest, a small group of people, because they were so horrified. You tell the story in The Terms of My Surrender about your experience as a young man going to Bitburg because President Reagan did. Could you share that story here?
Yes, well, it came on the TV. I was in a bar with some friends in downtown Flint, Michigan, and Reagan announced that he was going to Bitburg to lay a wreath on the graves of SS Nazi soldiers to honor them in Bitburg, Germany. And people were confused. Why would you want to honor Nazis? And let me just say, this is a side point here. Thank God we've never had another president since Reagan that was so enamored with Nazis. So a friend of mine, Gary, both of his parents were survivors of Auschwitz, and we decided to go to Bitburg to confront Reagan in the cemetery. And we made up some fake press credentials. Gary spoke fluent German. I spoke fluent BS. And we were able to get into the cemetery. We snuck into the cemetery and waited for Reagan to get there, and then we whipped out this banner that said, "We came from Michigan to remind you they killed my family," and the German cops jumped us immediately, ripped the banner out of our hands.
Oh, wait, there was some media there.
Oh, yeah, there was a lot.
Which you had managed to get right next to.
Well, yeah, well, I saw Pierre Salinger standing over there, and he was working for ABC at the time, and he was President Kennedy's press secretary. So I just went up to him and I said, "Mr. Salinger, my friend and I were from Flint, Michigan. We're not press." You know, like he couldn't tell.
So you had press badges?
Yes, we had the badges. We're going to do an action here when Reagan gets here, but we're afraid the Germans are going to hurt us. If you could just have your camera there, because I think the last thing the Germans want today is footage going out across the world of them beating a Jew in the Bitburg Cemetery, and Salinger's like, yeah, I'll help you, sure. And so he had his camera right there, and I think that because the cop that had grabbed me had already had his club up over my head, like he was going to come down with it, and he turned and he saw the lens of Pierre Salinger's camera right there, and he goes, and he puts the billy club away, and I didn't get my head cracked open. So then they just hauled us out of there. They put us back in the back of a truck and just hauled us out of there.
So this was shown all over the world.
Yes, we were live on ABC. And yeah, because it was, yes, if you remember at the time, if you're old enough, if you saw that, it was quite, people just couldn't understand why Reagan was wanting to lay a wreath on Nazi graves. But like I said, fortunately, we're through that kind of president, and that won't happen again.
You've been taking on these issues from white supremacy, Ku Klux Klansmen, racist violence for quite some time, right back to high school. Another story you tell, but your story of the Elks Club.
Yes, I was selected to go to Boys State, which is where you go to play government for a week. Every high school, at least in Michigan, sent 5 girls and 5 boys to Girls State and Boys State, and you elect a girl governor and a boy governor and a state legislature and all that. It's to teach you how to run a campaign. And I didn't want anything to do with it, and so I just stayed in my dorm room the whole time. Except I saw a poster one day that said, speech contest, write a speech on the life of Abraham Lincoln and win a prize here at Boys State, sponsored by the Elks Club. And my dad had just gone to join, this is 1971, he'd just gone to join the Elks Club, and he got there and they gave him an application form, and at the top of the application form it said Caucasians only. It's the 70s. It's still legal. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, there was a loophole that allowed racial discrimination could continue if it was a private group or a membership organization. So back then, for instance, you have the Friends of Democracy Now, whatever you were a member of Democracy Now, you could actually racially discriminate as long as you were a private membership group. And I just stood there and I'm thinking, they're sponsoring a contest on the life of Abraham Lincoln, this whites-only organization. So I went and wrote a speech back in my room. I showed up at the contest, I gave it, and I won the contest. And then I had to...
And Elk wasn't choosing.
And no, there was no Elks there. There was like a speech teacher. And the whole thing was slamming the Elks for doing this and slamming Boys State. Why are you having these racists here at this, you know? Then I have to give the speech the next day at the boy governor inauguration. And I have to sit next to the head Elk, who's got big antlers coming out of his hat and a trophy in his lap that he's going to present to me at the end of the speech. And I'm just thinking, oh no, this is not going to end well. And so I gave the speech. And I turned and looked at him, and he's just all beet red. His face is so angry. And I just said at the end of the speech, I just looked at him and I said, "And I don't want your stinking trophy." And the whole place erupted in applause. I ran off the stage because I was worried he was going to hurt me. And from that very night on the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite, because it was out on the wire services that I did, they did the story, and then it's in the media for the rest of the...
You refused to talk to them.
You know, they wanted me to come on, but no, I was really, I know this is hard to believe, but I was a really shy kid. You know that a little bit about me, don't you? Kind of. I'm on a personal level, I'm a very like this, you know, and back then I was worse, and so I didn't go on the CBS Evening News, but they did the story anyways, and it caused this uproar all over the country. And we had a great, very liberal left U.S. senator from Michigan named Philip Hart. And he called me and he said, I want to introduce a bill to fix this loophole in the Civil Rights Act, and I want you to come down and testify. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I just told him my parents don't let me leave the house, so I didn't go to D.C. to testify. But hearings were being held all over the country. A federal judge takes away the tax-exempt status of the Elks Club, and they start getting hit with all this stuff. Liquor licensors were being pulled from their clubs. A big hullabaloo, and a year and a half later, the Elks and all these private groups are finally forced to accept all Americans into their organization, regardless of the color of their skin. And it was such a lesson to learn at the age of 17, a dangerous lesson for me, that you could affect change by doing just a little tiny thing. And again, it was just what I said at the beginning here, is how we're told from the time we're kids that we really, you can't fight City Hall. Why knock your head against the wall? It's not going to do anything. That's the big lie. That's the big lie, that we're nobodies from nowhere and we can't affect change. The truth is that we're all somebody. We are all from somewhere. And the thing that the wealthy elite establishment is afraid of is that if we ever figure out that there's more of us than there are of them, they're in big trouble. They know that. Because the thing they must hate about this country, the rich, is it's still, at least on paper, in spite of the voter suppression, in spite of the gerrymandering, it's still one person, one vote. That hasn't been changed. So, and there's only so many of them. There's a hell of a lot more of us. And if we take that power in our hands, they're in a boatload of trouble.
Do you think there are a lot more woke folks now?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Look what happened the day after Trump's travel ban. He announces this the week after his inauguration. The next day, tens of thousands of Americans, there was no organization to this, no leadership, no call for a demonstration, none of this. Just people on their own showed up at their local airport, whether they lived in Hays, Kansas, or out at JFK. People just poured out to the airports with homemade signs against the travel ban. That was 1 week after the women's marches all over the country, all over the world. No, I've been very hopeful in the sense that a lot of people have come alive and nobody's going back to bed.
We'll have more with filmmaker Michael Moore, who is starring on Broadway for the first time in his one-man show, The Terms of My Surrender. Yes, more with more in a minute.
Sale loco de contento con su cargamento para la ciudad. Ay, para la ciudad. Lleva en su pensamiento todo un mundo lleno de felicidad. Ay, de felicidad. Piensa remediar la situación del hogar que es toda su ilusión así y alegre.
Danielle Santos here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our conversation with the Academy Award-winning filmmaker Michael Moore, who is starring on Broadway for the first time in his one-man show, The Terms of My Surrender. He'll be doing a new TV show on network television, TNT, called Michael Moore Live from the Apocalypse in February. And he has a new movie coming out in the spring called Fahrenheit 11/9. That's the day after the election. Well, I asked him how he has time for everything.
I don't have a choice. None of us have a choice. We have to do everything. We are in the French Resistance. Everybody has to have that attitude. That you got to get the kids to soccer practice. Well, the kids can walk for the next year till we get rid of Trump. You've got couples therapy at 4. Get along with your spouse for just one more year. We have got to get rid of Trump. I mean, it's serious. I hate to put it this way, but I have a fire lit under me, I guess, and I'm doing whatever I can do, and I think people watching this are doing what they can do, and we just have to reach out and continue to get more and more people involved in this. Till he's gone, we have to at least discombobulate him to the point where, he's so obsessed about all the things that are going to keep him from focusing on the really bad things that he's going to do. He will take us to war. We will be in a war with this man. And when that happens, I need everybody watching this show, listening to us on the radio, I need everybody to commit that we have to stand up immediately. Don't even stop if Trump is taking us to war, you have to automatically assume this is an insane idea from an insane man. It's a lie we're being told. My fear is that the so-called liberal establishment, the Democrats, 29 Democrats in the Senate voted to let Bush invade Iraq. The New York Times got behind the war in Iraq. Judith Miller, they put stories on the front page that weren't true. The New Yorker magazine ran an editorial I think it was the week before the war, saying that we should do this. These are our liberal establishment. It has to be called into question here, and we have to not follow them if they do that again. And in the show, I actually play a couple of clips of the night Trump bombed Syria, that Syrian airfield. Right away on MSNBC and on CNN, people were waxing poetic about Trump is now the president. This next time when we go to war, and I will say this again, Trump will take us to war. He's out there in Bedminster, New Jersey, last month, threatening fire and fury. I ask the audience every night, can we all just agree that no good idea has ever come out of Bedminster, New Jersey? Just no offense to the town. I'm just saying that's not where you start a nuclear war. If Trump says that North Korea suddenly is the enemy and we have to, do not believe this. Do not go to war. Unless you see North Korean troops marching through that arch down in Washington Square Park, or if a friend calls you from the vegan section at Chelsea Market and says, there are North Koreans marching down the aisle, grabbing all the vegan food. Okay, then maybe, but still, question it. Question it. Do not follow along with the liberal New York Times, with the liberal commentators, the so-called liberal, the Democrats in the Senate who won't stand up. As we sit here right now doing this interview, not a single Democrat in the U.S. Senate has called for his impeachment, has stood up on the floor and said, I demand the impeachment of Donald Trump. Not one Democrat can say that yet in the Senate. There have been a number in the House, Maxine Waters and others, but nobody in the Senate. This is the people that are supposed to be representing us still don't have the spine that's going to be needed to fight Trump and to make sure we don't have a two-term Trump.
And you don't think the woke folks in the streets, the people who marched in Boston, the NFL players... That
has to continue. It has to continue and not stop. Because remember, a month before the war started in Iraq, New York City, how many were in the streets? Wasn't it like 500,000?
Millions rocked the world.
And then around the world, it was millions. And then the war started, and people around the world still protested. But here, the protests shrunk. People started to be quiet about it. That can't happen this time. Everybody off the bench. Everybody in the pool. Seriously, this is it.
That's filmmaker Michael Moore, starring on Broadway for the first time. It's a one-man show, The Terms of My Surrender. Oh, there are little appearances of other people. It has a limited run until October 22nd. And that does it for our show. If you'd like to see the whole interview, go to DemocracyNow.org. Well, if you'd like to get a copy of the show, you can go to DemocracyNow.org as well. I'll be speaking tonight in Winnipeg, in Canada, at the Knox United Church at 7 p.m. On Saturday, I'll be in Halifax, Nova Scotia, speaking at 7 p.m. On Sunday afternoon in Guelph at 2, and then in Toronto at 6:30. You can check our website. Juan Gonzalez will be speaking in Kansas City tonight, Friday night, as well. Go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Charina Nadura, Amel Ahmed, and Nat Needham. Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grant, David Prude, R.L. Boone. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.